Hey everyone, welcome to Signals. I'm your host, Gwen Chen. Here's the truth. Everyone has data, but only winners have signals. Every episode, I sit down with leaders who have figured out how to turn data into signals, signals into actions, and actions into growth. Marketing, GTM, growth, and product. If you want to know what's actually working, you are in the right place. Joining me today is Colleen Quinn. Colleen is a real powerhouse in everything messaging and product marketing, with deep expertise in analytics, AI, data, and governance. Colleen and I know each other at AWS. She was my go-to person every time I wasn't so sure about messaging. Colleen used to be a journalist as well, just like me. She was incredibly clear in the way she communicates. She was always thoughtful and empathetic, and that's what makes her a great marketer. I'm so excited for you all to hear from her today. Welcome, Colleen. I'm so excited to see you today. Like I said, you are my go-to marketing person every time I wasn't so sure about messaging. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so excited to be here too, Glenn. And it's hard for me to believe that I was your go-to person because I feel like you were my go-to person. So there we go.
Nice of you to say that. I want to open up the conversation with your job as a journalist.
Yeah.
For folks who don't know, you started your career as a journalist. Tell us about that and then maybe explain how that experience shapes your approach to product marketing.
Yeah, I did start my career as a TV journalist and TV producer. And it's so funny because, Gwen, I'm older than you are. And so you're always given this advice that your resume should have 15 years worth of experience and no more because then we look old. And I have way more than 15 years of experience, but I always leave that on there because every single time I have an interview, someone says, wait, you produced TV or like you won an Emmy? And so then I say, yeah, I won too. And so anyway, it was a bizarrely organic process. So I was working in TV news. I was a TV producer. Then I started working for a post-production company and it led me to behind the scenes technology. And I realized like all the technology around content management and coding. And I realized I was deeply fascinated with that process of how work gets done. And then, learning about tech and then learning how to tell tech stories, I realized they were really the same thing. So in journalism, everything I had to do was about crispness, clarity, timeliness, making sure I was communicating all of these salient details to audiences. And as I moved deeper and deeper into product development, which is where I first landed when I moved over to tech, and then product marketing, which is where I am now, those values were really the same. And so, I'm always on time with my deliverables. Let me just say that. That was the other takeaway from journalism that has been instrumental in my career. But I do think when I think about what TV producers or what journalists do and what we do as product marketers, you have to tell a story that communicates the essential and clear details to an audience. And you have to do it in a way that's compelling and engaging. And so I think if you can take those fundamental tenets of storytelling from TV production or journalism and carry those over into any sort of marketing, really product marketing or otherwise, you're going to have a tremendous amount of success.
I love that. And you're using the Amazoning verbiage as well, tenants. I like that. That's your guiding principle
Well,
of
I
doing
drank the
anything
Kool-Aid.
marketing. Yeah, I like that. Just to summarize, so your transition from journalism to marketing, the biggest takeaway and transferable skills are be crystal clear
Yeah.
what you're talking about and then communicate the most essential parts and then also don't forget about the details. And then most importantly, be always accountable and be able to handle stress and then work under a tight deadline, right?
Yeah.
And journalists take deadline seriously.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I hadn't really thought about until you just said it right now, the ability to work under pressure. You and I have similar backgrounds here, albeit unorthodox. Journalism really teaches you how to work under pressure, and you don't have the opportunity to not deliver. In my case, I worked in television. I was on the 10 p.m. news show. It happened at 10 o'clock every night. If my story wasn't done at 10, it didn't make air. And so you really learn how to do a job that is critical and clear and authentic and accurate, right? Accuracy matters in journalism and
Right.
engaging. And you have to work under pressure. I never really thought about the pressure cooker part of it, Gwen, until you just said it right now. So the next time we have this conversation, I'm going to lead with that actually.
I'm sure we'll have more time to talk about
Yeah.
it next time. So, want to switch gears and talk about your job right now at Vast Data. Tell us what you do over there and tell us what is the company about.
I joined the company about a year ago, and so I'm responsible for product marketing for capabilities on the Vast AI operating system. It's really revolutionary in the sense that Vast has architected this entirely new architecture that allows the platform to scale to exabytes and also handle all sorts of data workloads. I know your audience isn't necessarily data and analytics, but if you're familiar with how this works, typically companies who have a data ecosystem are weaving together dozens of products to accomplish their initiatives, whether they're AI or data. And Vast really collapses all of that into a single platform. So super amazing, really revolutionary. And I'm responsible for the parts of that service that help companies deliver AI. So Fortune 1000 companies who are looking to use AI either for their own internal productivity or for delivering new and cool services to their customers. Vast is about 8 years old now, but it's this massively, rapidly growing startup. So it's interesting. They're so big and they've been around so long where they should be a more mature startup, but they're still in this hyper growth stage. So, my career, as you know, Gwen, I've worked for really large, well established companies. I've worked for small, scrappy startups. And it's really hard to situate Vast on that continuum because it is so innovative. It does move so fast, but it's also not tiny. It's been a real learning curve for me to be there and, really immerse myself like you have in this AI space. And then also, again, be part of this, what we lovingly call the rocket ship at Vast because it just moves so fast and it's growing so quickly.
Yeah. What I'm hearing are two things, and that's exciting. One thing is move fast. Move fast, meaning that's exciting.
Yes.
I like the word rocket ship, right? Another thing I think is hyper growth. Hyper growth means a lot of opportunities, a lot of exciting projects for you to take on.
Absolutely. So cool, right? To be part of the team that is crafting that story because I know that this company has legs. Like I know that this company will be or is as transformative as AWS is or Google or Oracle. And to have a small part in telling that story is really great, right? Like it's just great. I mean, it reminds me in some ways of AWS was a very different company, but it reminds me in some ways of, when we had this small part in writing keynotes for our CEO at AWS. Like you're telling the story that is just going to unfold for years and years and years. So for me, it's been really, exciting and rewarding. Also, it's a very technical role. Gwen, as product marketers, sometimes we are more technical and sometimes we're less technical. Like different companies have different personalities. And so this role has forced me to get really into the nitty gritty of the tech. And that's uncomfortable. I mean, sometimes I was really questioning, like, what do I do with this? But it's also been, great for me to keep my, chops fresh and learn a lot.
Yeah. I want to switch gears to your projects across the years.
Yeah.
You've worked in some of the most exciting companies you mentioned earlier, AWS and Dremio, Vast Data.
Yeah.
Looking back, any exciting projects and moments that shaped how you approach marketing today?
I think for me as a marketer, one of the most transformative experiences that I've ever had, I worked for a much smaller company, like still very big. We'd all be very, very happy to have them on your bank account every year. They're privately held, so I can't give a size. But they're called Data Innovations, and I ran the whole of the marketing function for them. And they are a life sciences technology company and had been sold almost entirely through channel. So what that means is they had partners who would sell on their behalf. And what started to happen over the years is they had given up that message to these partners. So for partner A, they might position the technology in one way. Partner B might position the technology in another way, but none of them really showcased kind of the true value of this entire product. And so they realized that over time they were starting to be eroded with some of this competitive pressure. And so they thought, well, we should really take this back into our own hands. How do we go direct to the marketplace? So they brought me in to help orchestrate that change. Um, and so there was nothing from the ground up. This was a company that had been around, 15, 20 years. And so I was able to craft message from the ground up about how critical this, really think about it as an orchestration layer for hospitals, between hospitals and laboratories. Sounds boring, but if you've ever had a kid go to the ER in the middle of the night, you want that to work, right? You want your lab results to go somewhere and a doctor to get them and come back and tell you everything's okay. And they literally fundamentally ran that whole orchestration layer at hospitals all over the globe. And so to be able to get to tell that message and then empower sellers and enable sellers, I think that is something we don't talk about enough. Like, yeah, it's great to have messages that are clear and crisp, but then what do we want sales to go do with that? Like, how do we then deliver?
Mm-hmm.
How do we activate that in the market? How do we activate that from a demand gen standpoint? To be able to build all of that out, soup to nuts, like start to finish, was thrilling. And literally in like the less than 36 months that I was there, we almost tripled revenue. It was incredible. But that's the
Mm.
power of owning your own message, right? Like if you're not
Right.
crystal clear on who you are and what you do, and you don't get that into the market, like the market's not going to know. And so in their case, they had trusted, because it was allowed them to scale. They had trusted this message to different partners, and those partners, didn't tell the story quite right. And so they really sort of bifurcated the message. And once we took that back into our own hands and we're able to really say, hey, look, these are the things that we do, this is how you use that, the true value of the product and the capabilities became immensely clear.
Mhm. I'm going to ask you a hard question. What are the hardest messaging principles to uphold under tight timeline and pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I do this all the time, but I think the most important thing is just adhering to clarity. So what I find starts to happen is, you craft a message, you build that with customer pain, you understand what the need is, you understand the technology, you build this message and you're like, okay, this is the thing, this is where we are differentiated, or this is what the market needs to hear. And then as you sort of approach either whether it's a go-to-market, you have a launch, or you're kind of looking to put that message into market, you get a lot of noise. I mean, Gwen, it's the name of your podcast, really, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you start to get, and it's the name of your podcast because it's true. So you're like, okay, this is the thing where we add value. This is the distilling point we want to hit the market with. And then somebody comes in and they say, oh, yeah, but we're the fastest. And then someone else comes in and says, yes. And, also our TCO is much less. And then someone else comes in and says, well, we have this. So you start to get all of this noise, and it's like too many chefs in the kitchen, right? Like there's this old adage, too many chefs in this kitchen and you ruin the meal. And so that's what starts to happen. You get everyone sort of piling on, right? Like, well, we're the best, we're the fastest, we need to say this. And all that does is muddy your message. So you have to be almost ruthless. And sometimes it's hard, right? Like, Dremio was a founder led startup. Vast is a brilliant founder led startup. And these folks have successful startups because they're brilliant and they have great ideas. But you have to be really ruthless on this, like, guys, this is what we're saying today. And we're focusing on this. And we have this opportunity to now unfurl this story over time. Today we say this. We're going to build on this tomorrow with performance. Then we'll build on it in a week with TCO or what have you. But it's really, as you so eloquently say, name and sort of theme of this podcast, being able to kind of push away the noise and be ruthlessly focused on a handful of details or a couple of salient details. And that's really hard. The closer you get to launch, the more noise there is. And sometimes you're like, okay, we're going to just say that. But you really shouldn't. You really need to be ruthless. And it's not always easy, but it's important in order to maintain that clarity.
In my earlier career as a journalist, my editors always told me, you can't write 10 things in one article.
Yeah.
You have to focus on one topic in one article.
But it's just, I wish, and that is absolutely true. But look, so in my years as a TV producer, got some notes back from networks where I was like, wait, like this isn't great feedback. But yeah, you need to, take the time to tell the story. And sometimes you have to tell the story. You often have to tell the story in a drumbeat, right? Like we talk a lot in marketing about marketing drumbeats. And so this gives you this opportunity to tell the story with multiple points over time. I think particularly startups struggle with this because they really desperately want their message to be heard and they haven't I think sometimes they feel like they haven't yet earned the credibility to take time. And so they feel the need to your point, to put all of this in one story when what you need to do is be ruthlessly focused on, as you said, one detail per story or one story per story. And then let's tell 10 stories, right? Let's figure out an arc where we tell 10 stories, but like, let's not cram all 10 stories into one thing. And so I think that's the hardest part, is that discipline to not do that.
Yeah. Let's say, imagine that you have published 10 stories, right? And then maybe each story has a focus area. And then what is the metric, or do you have any frameworks to share? How can you tell which one resonates most with the customers?
Here's a great example. So just yesterday, or earlier this week, my analyst relations person came up to me and said, "Hey, Colleen, uh, launching a new magic quadrant. Um, and it's for this thing called the Lake House." And I was like, "What?" Gwen, I've been briefing Gartner for years, saying, "Hey, you should think about a lake house quadrant." This is all for those of you who aren't in this space. This is very nuanced language, but for years. And so this week I learned we have a Gartner Magic Quadrant for Lake House. To me, that's the win. When I hear my messaging repeated back to me as fact, right? When someone says, "Hey, did you know when you're thinking about analytics, you need to think about these top three things, or AI, these top three things," and they're the three things that I've been saying, I know I've won. Similarly, when I find sales saying the same thing back to me, that's when I know the message has landed. When others in the industry are repeating back that same thing that I've been saying for days, weeks, months, that's when you know it's landed.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a huge, huge impact.
Yes.
Well, if you think of product marketing, what are the biggest responsibilities? Messaging, positioning, AR
Yeah.
relations, and everything, I would say interconnected. Everything starts from messaging, positioning, enabling sales, enabling analysts, enabling journalists, and everybody internally as well, until one day you see all of the hard work paid
Yeah.
off.
And by no means am I taking any sort of credit for that Magic Quadrant at all. All I'm simply trying to say is, for me, I know that the work I'm doing is relevant when it starts to get repeated back to me. And you can see that in many forms. When our sales guys are in meetings with customers and they're slacking me quotes from customers who have said, "Yes, I've been looking for this all along," or, "Yes, you're exactly articulating my problem." When I start to hear it come back, that's when I know that what I'm doing is successful. And it can come back in many forms, right? Like, I was literally just before our call reading an article in TechCrunch about something very nuanced about vector databases, something we've been saying all along, and the market is moving in that direction. I was like, yeah, here we go. So sometimes we're impatient, right? Because at the end of the day, marketing is meant to drive sales, and sales is quarterly. So there's impatience. But sometimes our patience pays off when we see that story come back to us as like a market adopted truth. For me, when that happens, that is super cool. Doesn't happen fast, but when that happens, it's really rewarding.
Yeah. Want to switch gears, Colleen? In my eyes, you are always super, super confident. You know your work, you're very experienced. Have you ever had any self doubt when you are about to push or launch something new and bold?
Yeah. And I think anyone who tells you they haven't had that kind of doubt, they're either two things. They're either lying or they didn't push far enough, right? So it's like, you know, if you're taking a safe route, maybe you never have a crisis of confidence. But if you're going to market with something really bold and innovative and maybe pushing those boundaries, yeah, you bet you're scared, right? Like you should be not scared, but you should have a crisis of confidence. And I also think, like, if you're not nervous about something, you don't care about it, right? Like, that's sort of my own general personal value. So like, if I'm blasé about something, then I'm not deeply invested in it. So for me, like, the gut check that I have about whether I'm trying to be as aggressive as I can be, whether that's with a message or positioning, pushing as hard as I can to get this message out into market. And then also, do I care about what I'm doing? Those three things, like if I don't feel a little bit of a crisis of confidence, then I'm not doing any of those things. And I think, Gwen, do you remember at AWS, there was a whole class on imposter syndrome, which I found hilarious and wonderful because I think when you're doing really innovative things, like we are at Vast in particular, and I know Eddie felt the same way, like we're really leading the market, and you're in a room, like I am in a room every day with the smartest people. And I felt the same way at AWS, like everyone was so smart. Everyone at Vast is so smart. And so you start to have a little bit of this, like, am I as smart as they are? And so that's good, right? Because that forces you to try to be better and think faster and be more creative. And then the other thing I try to remind myself is like, I'm really good at what I do. You're really good at what you do. And they're really good at what they do. And we bring all different skill sets to the table. And so when you have a team you can trust and you trust everyone's unique contribution, I think you can still feel that little pit in your stomach, but you have a lot more confidence that you're pushing in the right direction and that things will work out, right? And then sometimes you don't. Sometimes you make a mistake, right? And that's okay too.
Yeah, one of my biggest takeaways working at AWS is, like you mentioned, a lot of smart
Yeah.
people. Definitely, tension can be there, but you have to earn your seat to the table. You earn a seat in the table by working hard. Once you earn that table, you need to speak up because you are expected to share your authentic opinion. Sometimes people really appreciate it when I push back because they invite me to the table to share my professional opinion as a marketer. Yeah, I may be not as smart as you as an engineer or product manager, but I'm here to provide my marketing expertise to the table.
Yeah, that's exactly right, right? And I think sometimes I have to remind myself of that, right? And like I'm there for a reason. And I've been doing this for a very long time. And I know I'm very good at it. And so, even where I am currently, like there is a real predisposition to very technical marketing. The product lends itself to that. And that's great. But if you're trying to tell your story to executive leaders, higher level decision makers, there's a different altitude where you need to tell the story. I always think about it like college classes, 100 level, 200 level, 300 level, and so forth. Lots of tech companies like to be at that really in the weeds 300 level. And there is absolutely a place for that. But the person in the C suite, the chief data officer, the persona, the person that I'm talking to, they're not really invested in, nor do they care about those technical intricacies. What they care about is what's the outcome for my business? Like, how is this going to help me help my customers? Or how is this going to help my internal stakeholders be more successful? And so there's a place for all of those altitudes. And I think sometimes when you're dealing with really technical founders, really technical engineers, you've got to help communicate the value of those different altitudes. And to your point, you have to earn the right to do that. And that's really uncomfortable, particularly when you're newer in an organization, right? It's really uncomfortable to earn that seat at the table. You have to do it. And then I feel like once you do, it gives you a lot more latitude to push back, as you say. I'm grateful that I feel like I've earned that seat at the table at Vast. It wasn't easy, right? Like, again, really smart people and a really nuanced technology. But then to be able to do that and say, yeah, guys, like, I think we need to go about this a different way and be successful and sort of help guide that story, for me anyway, is really rewarding.
So you mentioned about target audience. Sometimes your target audience are pretty
Yeah,
technical developers. Sometimes your target audience are C-level executives who may not care about the details, but they care about the value,
right.
right? Can you share your process of doing your research, understanding your audience, maybe the market dynamics and the analyst opinions, and then what is your approach, your process of distilling all of these information into something that speaks to the language of your target audience?
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, that's a big question. So, I mean, obviously, there's just so much information out there, and you need to start to distill it all down, right? And you need to understand what builders care about. That really technical audience is, to your point, is very different from what executive buyers, or executive leadership tends to care about. So I think analyst insight is important. because that's where the C-suite tends to look, right? They look there, they want that kind of assurance, that sort of safety net that comes with an analyst endorsement. So I do think it's important to understand the landscape of analysts, what they're saying, what they think is valuable. I have great relationships with a lot of our analysts. I, was heavily involved in the leadership of that function at Dremio and getting more so there every day at Vest. But, they're always a little bit behind, right? And I'm working now with a company where we're really creating their own category, right? So that's very different from working with a company where there's already an established category, right? So we're looking at where do we fit in terms of existing categories, but we really know that there is no other platform like ours. And so that's even more challenging, right? To have to convey this completely net new idea into a market that's used to kind of categorizing people. Are you a data warehouse? Are you an AI platform? Are you a vector database? It's like, yes, we're all of those things. And so that takes much more time and education. In terms of what builders need, like, I talked a lot to our solution engineers, like understanding, like what they're seeing in the market, listening to customer calls, going to customer meetings, talking to the developers and builders themselves. All of that is really instrumental, right? And then, so like from the bottom up feedback, I get a lot of that from just engaging with the engineering community directly or engaging with our own DevRel teams to like understand what they're seeing and hearing. They're the best ears on the ground for me. And then for sort of that 100 level, sort of that more executive view, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just, doing a lot of reading, engaging with analysts, talking to those leaders directly, and then, over time, synthesizing down those different persona messages because they're not the same, right? What developers care about or engineers care about is radically different from what executive personas care about. And then message testing that as well, right? Like I find that very valuable. And then leaning into those developer communities to validate, again, those technical nuances. So you've got to work both of those paths in parallel. They run in parallel, they're very different. What I find most important is that when I think about sort of that lower level developer story and then that higher level executive story, they need to ladder up, right? There needs to be connective tissue in the middle. He had a boss, I stole this from him, and it's this idea of this missing middle, right? So it's like we tell the high level message, my company is the fastest. And then we tell this really detailed developer message, here's how you are the fastest. And we forget this bit in the middle, right? And so I think making sure that there's connective tissue between that developer message and then that executive message is frankly like the most important part, right? Because that's, I think, how you drive customers down into better understanding your product.
So there are like a lot of informations. You mentioned the analyst opinions and then your DevRel team's
Yes.
opinions and then sales team and then
Yes.
customers as well. How to make sure your messaging stays grounded in customer insights as well as product truths. I guess I'm trying to ask, so there are different inputs. Which one do you treat? Do you give more weights? Is it analyst opinions? Is it market insights? Is it competitive
Yeah.
analysis? Is it customer insights?
If you aren't starting and ending with what your customer needs, you're absolutely missing the mark. I think competitive analysis is super important, but what I start to find can start to happen when marketing teams are overly focused on competitive. This happens even like a bit more with more mature products, is you start to get into this sort of feature parity war and you lose sight of like, what am I really looking to deliver to my customers? So like, it's great that I'll pick on a big brand. It's great that, whatever, Databricks has said feature. It's great. But like, does it really matter that we do too? It's like you start to get into this like tick and tie. Well, they do this, so we need to do this. Well, they do that, so we need to do that. And at the end of the day, that can lead you to feature bloat. That can lead you to a roadmap that veers far off from what your customers care about. Your customers might be using a complementary product who you perceive as a competitor to accomplish some small tasks. But if what your customers love about you is, for example, your scale or your performance or your simplicity, and you start to overly lean in on competitive analysis where you're trying to tick and tie features just for feature parity, you're gonna lose your way. And a lot of companies do this. So I think competitive is it's important. We absolutely need to know, where our competitors are, what they're doing. But I think you need to remain relentlessly focused on your customers. And I will say, this is an incredible thing about Vest. Like the way they've developed the product, they developed this, first of all, this revolutionary architecture totally fundamentally changes the game. And then they're just relentlessly focused on what customers need. AWS had the same focus. So for me, I always start and end there. Yes. And then analysts we talked about, they're important to me simply because I know that that's our executive's goal, right? And so I think being credible in the eyes of an analyst is extremely important. And I also know that they talk to, I talk to my customers, I talk to our prospects. They're talking to everybody and to my competitors. So they have a much broader perspective. So even if that perspective is, maybe not something that necessarily aligns with my messaging or positioning, it's essential that I know what they're thinking, right? So I can just, again, so I can use that to be informed with what I'm writing or what I'm saying. But absolutely start and end with customer always. I use analysts as sort of a credible North Star, and then don't get overly invested in competitive.
And then do you regularly update your messaging framework? Because I got asked a lot by my customers as well. Like, how often should you update your messaging framework?
I want it to be durable for 6 months. Sometimes at a fast moving startup, that's just not the case. What I've experienced, both in my own firsthand experience with other companies, and just also watching companies as they sort of are reaching this point in time where they didn't quite make that launch, startups in particular, and they start to flail for relevance, they start to spiral on their messaging a lot. And so it's almost like grasping at straws. It's like, well, today we are the best AI platform. Now tomorrow we're the best. So they're really just like grasping at like what will land. And I've actually even just seen analyst feedback or even customer feedback on Reddit talking about vendors where they're saying, we don't know what they're doing anymore, right? Like they keep changing their message every day. So we're not entirely clear. And so I think that creates confusion in the marketplace. I think it becomes clear to your customers and your prospects that you're not entirely clear what your direction is either. So I think, ideally, like for me, like 6 months, I want a target of 6 months at the shortest, a year at the longest, but you're always constantly truing up, right? And it goes back to that top, middle, bottom level that we were talking about. So that top level message, think of it like your major tagline or your sort of your 12 words, right? You want that to stick for 12 months. The middle you can massage a little bit more and you can refine over time. And then the technical detail needs to remain absolutely current with where you are at every launch, right? So I think there are different cadences for where you are in that messaging depth.
Mhm. So you talked a lot about sales. Can you share? Because I know in my experience, marketing and sales usually speak different languages. And that's because they have different goals, right? They measure it differently and they talk about products in different way. Can you share your experience working with the sales? What are the good examples for the two teams to stay aligned?
Yeah. So I think the thing I enjoy most actually about product marketing is it's really like this intersectional position, right? So you're in the middle of, product management and sales, right? And the customer, right? Like it's this three-way, and you need to listen to and feedback to every one of those. So it's tricky, right? You've got these three very discrete groups that you're needing to synthesize feedback from, needing to synthesize feedback to. And so I think that's what makes it super fun and exciting because everyone has different goals, right? Your product management folks, the voice of your engineers, are excited about the super blue thing. And your salespeople need to satisfy the demands of their customers, right? They're trying to solve customer problems. They're trying to make sales by solving customer problems. And so, sitting at that intersection of all three and then the customer themselves, it's really dynamic and challenging. So I think sometimes in organizations, there's this adversarial finger pointing, like, well, sales didn't work because marketing didn't tell me how to do it. And then marketing is like, well, I told them how to do it, but they didn't, So there's this little bit of finger pointing and that gets you nowhere. So for me, being really, really tightly aligned with my sales team is essential. In fact, I would say, and this I think is the way it should be. Actually, it's the first time I've ever had it this way. I am absolutely dotted line into my sales leadership. So like they are as much my executive as my boss is. And so what that means is I'm on every sales call. Not every sales meeting but I'm on every sales call. As I develop sales plays, which I think are a great way of helping turn message into action, right? Like these are the sales plays we're going after for name your timeline, quarter cadence, whatever. Like those sales plays are completely informed by what my sales teams are seeing in the market and the quality of those, how they're performing, whether they're resonating. I'm getting feedback on that in real time so I can make sure that those are absolutely aligned with our customers, how our sales guys are behaving, what they're seeing, is working, what they're seeing is not working. And so we can tweak the demand gen funnel, like not in real time, but very responsively. I think this is actually the tightest I've ever been aligned to sales here. Like you said, reporting in. And I think it's frankly the most successful I found product marketing and sales to be. So again, it's really acting as an extension of the sales team. But then there's also, there can be some of that whiplash too, that you need to, again, kind of going back to that ruthless focus. Sales can sometimes say, hey, we uncovered this opportunity. Let's go chase this thing. And it can create a little bit of a whiplash, like a tail wagging the dog. And then that's where that ruthless precision comes in. Like, hey, no, remember, we've said we want to talk. These are the 2 to 3 things that we are laser focused on. Let's go find those. And then, we'll go look at this new opportunity later. So it's again, remaining tightly aligned, but also having the discipline to keep this focus when you're like, oh, squirrel, let's go do this. Wait, no, we're not doing that today. We're remaining ruthlessly focused on these 2 to 3 top priorities.
A lot of insights. What I heard top of my mind are product marketing are connective tissue between product and sales. And number 2, ideally, product marketing should work together and very closely with each other. That's how you can drive the revenue.
Absolutely.
That's how you bring new opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to ask about AI because we're in the age of AI and we're all using AI to write copy.
Yeah.
And I want to ask your opinion. Right now, AI can automate a lot of things. They can give you a lot of ideas. They can generate generic copy. And how do you make sure your messaging stay unique in the sea of AI generated content?
I mean, I'll tell you, nothing gets me more frustrated these days when I read that, when I read copy that I know. I mean, first of all, we're all using Chat GPT or some AI tool to generate copy. And if you aren't, you should be, right? You should be. I mean, it is a productivity amplifier if you use it like that. I'm a very productive person in general. And, I always say I do the work of 3 people. And now, thanks to AI, I feel like I do the work of 5. So, like a full AI advocate here, but use it to generate ideas. Use it to give you a first draft. Use it to help you synthesize your thinking, but then always be rigorous about your next round of edits. Like I treat AI like it is a really motivated, fresh out of college, copywriter. It's do good work and it's adorable. But I know it doesn't have the maturity, right? It doesn't have the maturity yet. Nor does it have the technical depth. And that's the other thing you grapple with if you use AI tools a lot. Again, you've got to be so cautious about hallucinations, particularly with technical accuracy, right? Like that is a real risk. And so anything that comes out of AI, you have to run it through a really strong lens of, is this on message? Is this accurate? Is this my tone of voice? Is this how I would say this? I find my role is much more of an editorial role now, which is great. But as you know, Gwen, an editor is the most important role, right? So it's like you have to be an excellent editorial board. So AI lets you evolve into becoming more of an editorial board versus a copywriter. But you cannot just pump AI out into the ether. And I have worked with companies and certainly read a lot of content where it's obvious that that's happening and it's sounds generic, it's inaccurate, and also everybody knows. And so, why is a customer going to give their time and attention to something that I didn't give my time and attention to, right? And so I think that that's the risk with AI is everyone's just spamming so much content out into the universe thinking more is better. And at the end of the day, it all starts to sound the same. It's all inaccurate. And you just, again, to kind of go back to the theme of your podcast, you've created so much noise. Like, at what value, really?
I have been thinking about this these days when I was preparing for this episode. I feel like marketers now are working like a editor,
Yeah.
meaning similarly to when we were a journalist, we report or work closely to with editor. Editor asks us to work on a story, and then we gather a lot of information. We wrote a story, and then the editor will edit and check. Almost similar to what you described. Editors, I would imagine they have a list of checkpoints, right? Is it accurate? Did you
Yeah.
verify the sources? Did you have multiple sources instead of relying on one single source of
Yeah.
truth? And then did you, I don't know, is it grammarly correct? And then is this on messaging and a lot of
Does it
things?
guide, right? Like every journalistic organization has a style guide, right?
Mhm.
President is President Chen, not Mr. Chen, right? Does it adhere to our principles, right? And also, is it aligned to how we talk about ourselves in the market? So yeah, I think that's where a lot, look, use AI. It is an accelerant for sure. But I think that you need to, again, apply that same discipline and be that really clear editorial board. And I think sometimes people are in such a hurry and they think more is better. And that doesn't happen. And it just leads to just a lot of slop out there, you know? And we know when we're reading something that isn't great. And so do your customers, you know, they know.
Any advice you would give to early marketing professionals?
Yeah, I think this is probably a pretty intimidating time to be an early marketing professional. So my advice would be to be brave, to know that we're all sort of faking it till we make it, whether you've been doing this for a long time like we have, Glenn, or you're just starting out, right? Everyone has that crisis of confidence. I think young marketers are going to face even more challenges just because early stage marketers relied on so heavily to do that initial phase of copy generation, which I think it's even more important now for young marketers entering the scene to earn your seat at the table, but you also, I think, have to be frankly a little bit more bold, you know, willing to take on new things, willing to learn new skills. I think all the time about how my role has gotten so much broader, things that I had never thought were traditionally in the scope of marketing, you know, like whether that be writing social media posts or creating social media cards, things are, no, like you wear many hats. And so I think that, you know, it's not unlike what's happened in the television business, right? Like you used to have producers and editors and writers, and now it's all collapsed. So you have to be constantly learning. You have to be willing to, you know, learn new skills, and you have to be willing to do all the jobs. And so I think if you have that attitude and that willingness to be bold, you're going to be just fine.
And adaptive as well,
Yeah,
right? Adaptive to take on new opportunities,
absolutely.
new tasks. Yeah. I want to flip the question. What is one piece of career advice you've received across your career?
One piece of I always,
The best
yeah,
one.
I know. And I always say this, and it's so important. And I now think of it as my advice, but frankly, someone said it to me. And that is you work with people and not companies, right? You work for people and not companies. And so what I take that to mean is when I look at, you know, we spend a lot of time at work, right? Like a lot of time. And so at the end of the day, yes, it's the technology is great and building a company is cool, but I want to do good work with great people. And so for me, when I think about going into work every day, I think that like I want to do good work, yeah, but I want to do good work with great people. And so for me, I always remember that people are at the center and that I work for people and that I'm working to serve people, right? So for me, that I think is the most important piece of advice I've been given. I have a second one too that's pretty funny if we have time for that.
Please share.
That's good. My favorite
Good.
boss said to me, I was having a bad day and I was in one of my first leadership roles. and I was pretty young, and we were on a very intense project, and I think I snapped at somebody, and he came in and he said, Colleen, don't kick the puppy. And so this is this concept of, as you have something challenging come up for you, you can have this opportunity to then take that out on the person beneath you, and then the person beneath you takes that out on the person under them, and so on. And so don't kick the puppy. And so it kind of goes back to you work with people, right? Like everyone is doing the best they can. We're all working in tricky positions. And we have to remember that at the end of the day, we're all people and we're all doing the best that we can.
Mhm. That's why we're talking today, even after so many years of working together at
Cool.
AWS.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
Those were fun times.
I know. I still remember you and I went on a call to talk about reInvent.
Oh yeah. I gotta say, I love reinvent. Those were long days. In fact, at Vast, we've got our first really large user group event coming up in February. And, it's been really reminiscent for me of reInvent because I know it's just getting started. And I love, there's nothing to align people like a deadline, right? Like if you're rolling out new messaging, you have a target date. But when you have an event, that event is on Tuesday, right? It's got to be done. It's not unlike what we were talking about around our journalistic careers. And so I love the cohesion that is forced from an event. So I'm super excited about it.
Well, Colleen, thank you so much for joining me. That was incredibly insightful. For listeners, thank you so much for spending time to listen to this episode. I have a lot of interesting conversations coming up very soon. So see you in the next episode.
Thanks.